The knock came at 9:30 on the night of February 9th, 1857, when Foxley Hall was already silent enough for Joanna Norris to hear the brass lion's head strike the front door from 2 corridors away. No visitor came to a Hampshire country house at that hour without bringing trouble, and Foxley had endured enough trouble to last a generation. 7 months earlier, Christopher Brockhurst, Duke of Woldingham, had vanished in the tidal water at Brockhurst Ferry. No body had been recovered. His portrait still hung above the entrance hall beneath a strip of black mourning crepe. Joanna's husband had died in the same disaster. But Daniel Norris had not been mourned with portraits and county sermons. He had been blamed. Joanna set down the estate inventory she had been correcting and rose from the small desk in the East Steward's apartments. Samuel sat before the fire in his nightshirt and wool dressing gown, rolling his walnut spinning top between both palms. Daniel had carved it for him 2 years earlier, shaping the dark wood with patient hands and fitting a small brass point beneath. "Stay here," Joanna said. Samuel looked toward the corridor. "Who is it?" "If I knew, I wouldn't need to answer the door." He frowned at the logic, but obeyed. Foxley's reduced household had already withdrawn toward the service wing. Since the Duke's presumed death, the great rooms were rarely opened after dusk. Mr. Harcourt had kept Joanna in residence because she knew Daniel's estate records better than anyone still employed at Foxley, but lawful usefulness did not make her mistress of the house. She was a young widow living temporarily inside another family's grief, and Lord Conrad Brockhurst had made it increasingly clear that he considered even that too generous. The knock came again, slower this time. Joanna took a candle from the hall table and crossed the entrance hall. Christopher Brockhurst's portrait watched from above her shoulder, painted when he had been younger, and broader through the chest, his expression composed in the way wealthy men were taught to look, as though uncertainty were something that happened only to other people. Joanna had never met him. Daniel had worked for the Brockhurst estate. But Joanna's place had been in the steward's house and village society, not at ducal dinners. She unfastened the inner bolt, but left the chain hooked. Cold air entered through the narrow opening. A man stood on the steps. His coat was travel-stained. His dark hair had grown longer than fashion allowed, and a pale scar crossed his left temple. He leaned slightly away from his right leg, not enough to seem helpless, only enough to reveal that walking had cost him something. He looked exhausted. He also looked exactly like the portrait behind her. Joanna's hand tightened around the candle. The man saw the recognition and did not move closer. "Mrs. Norris?" Joanna felt the first true shock then. "How do you know my name?" The brass plate beside the steward's apartments was visible when I came through the courtyard. His voice was rough but controlled, and someone left a school slate near the side door with Samuel Norris written across it. Joanna did not release the chain. "Who are you?" The stranger looked past her only as far as the entrance hall. His gaze stopped on the portrait covered in mourning crepe. Something changed in his face. Not surprise. Pain so immediate that Joanna almost looked away. Christopher Brockhurst. The candle flame trembled between them. Joanna's first thought was not that the dead had returned. It was that someone had chosen an exceptionally cruel deception. "The Duke of Woldingham is dead." That is what I was told. By whom? A Sussex clergyman who showed me a newspaper 6 weeks ago. He spoke without impatience. Before that, I knew my name only in pieces. Joanna stared at him. A man claiming amnesia sounded like a confidence trick written for gullible women. Yet confidence tricksters usually arrived clean, rehearsed, and eager to enter. This man remained beyond the threshold, even though the cold had reddened his hands. If you are Christopher Brockhurst, why have you come alone? I didn't begin alone. I left a hired carriage at the lower gate when the axle started complaining. The driver preferred his horses to my dignity. Despite herself, Joanna nearly smiled. She did not. You expect me to admit you? No. His answer was immediate. I expect you to send for Harcourt. Joanna's suspicion shifted. You know Mr. Harcourt. He was my father's solicitor before he became mine. The man glanced again toward the portrait. There is a loose panel beneath the west library window. My brother Conrad broke it when he was 14 and blamed the footman. The nursery stair behind the linen press has always stuck on the fourth tread. There is a crack through the marble figure of St. George in the upper gallery because I knocked it over when I was 11. Joanna said nothing. None of those things proved enough. The man seemed to understand. Don't take my word for it. A small voice came from behind her. Mama? Joanna turned sharply. Samuel had followed, despite instructions, the walnut top clenched in one fist. He stopped beneath the portrait. His gaze lifted to the painted duke, then returned to the stranger outside. Children could stare with a frankness adults had trained themselves to disguise. Samuel stared now. Mama, he whispered. That's the gentleman in the picture. The stranger closed his eyes briefly. Joanna felt something cold move through her. Before she could answer, wheels sounded on the gravel. A horse pulled up hard beyond the portico, followed by hurried footsteps. An estate messenger appeared behind the stranger, recognized the man on the steps, and nearly dropped the leather case he carried. Good God. The stranger turned. That remains to be established. The messenger's mouth opened twice before words emerged. Your Grace? Joanna saw the danger immediately. Recognition from one frightened employee could turn uncertainty into chaos. The stranger saw it too. You will call me Mr. Brockhurst until Mr. Harcourt says otherwise. The messenger swallowed. Yes, sir. He looked at Joanna with obvious discomfort. Mrs. Norris, I was sent with instructions from Lord Conrad. Joanna's stomach tightened. At this hour, I was told to deliver them tonight. He removed a folded document. Joanna did not need to open it to know its purpose. Conrad had been threatening for weeks to end her temporary arrangement at Foxley. The messenger handed it through the narrow doorway. Joanna read the first lines. She and Samuel were to vacate the east apartments within 48 hours. Her estate duties were concluded. The keys were to be surrendered to Conrad's appointed steward. I see, she said. The stranger held out his hand, then stopped before reaching across the threshold. May I read it? Joanna hesitated. He had not tried to enter. He had not taken the paper. He had asked. She passed the document through the gap. His eyes moved down the page. Fatigue disappeared from his expression, replaced by something quieter and harder. Lord Conrad issued this afternoon, the messenger said. On whose authority? He has been directing family matters since his grace was lost. The stranger looked at Joanna. Were you lawfully placed here? Mr. Harcourt arranged it. I catalogue estate correspondence and complete Daniel's unfinished inventories. And your son resides with you? Yes. He folded the paper once. Then nothing changes tonight. The messenger shifted uneasily. Sir, Lord Conrad's instruction is explicit. So is mine. But until your identity is formally recognized. Exactly. Christopher's voice remained level. Until my identity is formally recognized, Conrad cannot use my possible return as a reason to accelerate an eviction. Mrs. Norris stays, her son stays, her duties stay, the apartments and keys remain as they are until Harcourt reviews everything. Joanna stared at him. He had been at Foxley less than 5 minutes. He had not even crossed the door, yet his first use of possible ducal authority was not to demand entry into his own house. It was to stop someone weaker from being pushed out of it. The messenger looked miserable. What am I supposed to tell Lord Conrad? For the first time, something almost like grim humor touched Christopher's face. Tell him the dead man did. The messenger left with far greater speed than he had arrived. Silence returned to the portico. Joanna looked at Christopher Brockhurst, or the man who might be Christopher Brockhurst, and understood that keeping him outside now had become as unreasonable as admitting him freely. She unhooked the chain, but did not step aside entirely. You may enter the hall. His gaze met hers. No farther, not until Mr. Harcourt is sent for. Christopher inclined his head. Fair. Only then did he cross the threshold. He did it carefully, as though Foxley belonged to Joanna's caution until proof returned it to him. Samuel backed toward the foot of the stairs, still studying him. The boy's school slate, abandoned earlier beside a chair, slipped when his heel caught it and struck the floor. Christopher looked down. In chalk across the slate was written Samuel Norris. His face changed. The entrance hall seemed suddenly smaller. Christopher looked from the name to the child, then to Joanna. Daniel Norris was your father. By 10 the next morning, Foxley Hall had become a house attempting to prove that one of its dead men was alive without allowing hope to do the work of evidence. Christopher had slept in a guest chamber near the west corridor rather than reclaim the ducal rooms, a decision Joanna respected more than she intended to. He had also accepted clothes taken from a sealed wardrobe, after Mrs. Bell and the steward agreed that nothing should be disturbed until Mr. Harcourt arrived. The coat fit through the shoulders but hung too loosely at the waist. Whatever the months in Sussex had done to Christopher Brockhurst, they had taken weight from him. His right leg remained stiff when he crossed the morning room, though he refused the chair nearest the fire until an elderly woman entered behind Mr. Harcourt and began to cry. "Oh, my boy!" Christopher stopped. The woman was nearly 70, with silver hair beneath a plain cap and hands trembling against the front of her dark dress. Joanna had seen her only twice since coming to Foxley. She had once been nursery maid to the Brockhurst children, and had remained pensioned by the estate after age forced her retirement. Christopher looked at her for several seconds. Then something softened in his face. "You used to hide sugared almonds in the blue sewing box." The old woman covered her mouth. "Because you stole them from everywhere else. I was 9. You were a menace." Christopher's mouth moved faintly. "That sounds familiar." Mr. Harcourt did not smile. The solicitor had arrived from Winchester before full daylight had cleared the frost, carrying 2 locked document cases and the expression of a man who trusted procedure more than miracles. "Recognition is useful," he said, "but it is not sufficient." "I expected nothing less from you," Christopher replied. "Good. Then we proceed." Joanna remained near the window with Samuel beside her. The boy had been instructed not to interrupt unless spoken to, which meant he had already interrupted twice before everyone sat down. Now he held Daniel's walnut top in one hand and watched Christopher with open fascination. Mr. Harcourt began with questions no stranger could reasonably have prepared for. Christopher described the hidden stair behind the nursery linen press, and the fourth tread that caught in damp weather. He identified a crack in the marble St. George in the upper gallery and admitted he had caused it as a child. He named the drawer in the old estate desk, where his father kept private account notes separate from the household ledgers. He described the small ink mark he used beside expenditures he wished reviewed without embarrassing a steward in front of other staff. When Harcourt produced 3 samples of old correspondence, Christopher identified which one he had written himself and which 2 had been dictated to a secretary. "Why?" Harcourt asked. Christopher pointed to one line. "I never wrote the word, therefore, without crossing the first stroke of the F too high. My tutor hated it." Mr. Harcourt examined the page, then nodded once. The former nurse supplied the most private test. She looked almost apologetic when she said, "There was an abscess when you were 9. The physician lanced it below your left shoulder blade. Your father insisted no one speak of the scar because you were frightened the other boys would tease you." Christopher's face changed at the memory. "I remember the smell of vinegar more clearly than the pain." Mr. Harcourt turned to Joanna. "The physician who treated his grace is dead, but his old account book records the procedure. If necessary, I can arrange a private medical confirmation." Joanna nodded. She had not asked to be part of the verification, but Christopher had insisted that since Conrad's order concerned her removal, she should hear whatever established whether the man who had stopped it possessed legal authority. That choice had placed her in the room as more than a servant and less than a guest. It was an uncomfortable position. She preferred it to ignorance. By 11, Harcourt closed his final document case. "I am satisfied." The words seemed to alter the temperature of the room. The former nurse wept openly. Mrs. Bell crossed herself before remembering the Church of England had never taught her to do it. Samuel whispered, "I knew it." Joanna looked down at him. "You knew he resembled a portrait." "That's nearly the same." "It is not." Christopher heard and gave Samuel a grave nod. "Your mother is correct. Resemblance should not inherit estates." Samuel appeared to consider that wisdom worth keeping. Mr. Harcourt turned toward Christopher. "Your Grace, legally speaking, you never ceased to be Duke of Woldingham. Lord Conrad was heir presumptive during your presumed death, but no lawful succession was completed while uncertainty remained over your body and the necessary declarations." Christopher's expression hardened slightly, yet he has been directing Foxley. Family affairs, some household decisions, and temporary administrative matters through the Dowager Duchess's influence. Not the title itself. And Mrs. Norris? Harcourt glanced at Joanna. "I retained her because Daniel left unfinished inventories and because Mrs. Norris possesses an unusually detailed knowledge of estate correspondence. Her arrangement is lawful and temporary." Joanna said, "It was also useful. I preferred work to being sent back to relatives who would spend every meal explaining how unfortunate I was." The former nurse made a sympathetic sound. Joanna wished she had not. Christopher did not. He merely asked, "And Conrad wanted you removed now?" "He has wanted the arrangement ended for several weeks." "Why?" Joanna met his gaze. "Because my husband's death became inconvenient long before my residence did." The room quieted. Christopher looked at Harcourt, but Joanna continued, before the solicitor could soften the answer. "Daniel was blamed for what happened at Brockhurst Ferry." Christopher's face became blank with shock. "Blamed how?" Mr. Harcourt drew a breath. "The inquest accepted evidence that Mr. Norris interfered with the crossing, despite dangerous conditions, contributed to the ferry becoming unstable, and afterward made the rescue more difficult. Joanna watched Christopher carefully. The polite version is that Daniel panicked. The less polite version is that his recklessness killed himself and nearly killed you. Christopher stared at her. For one terrible instant, she wondered whether some memory had returned that would confirm every accusation she had spent 7 months resisting. Instead, he said, "No." Harcourt leaned forward. "Your Grace." Christopher's right hand closed around the arm of his chair. "I don't remember enough to tell you how the ferry overturned. I remember water, noise, then very little in order." He looked directly at Joanna. "But the last thing I remember with certainty is Daniel trying to keep me above it." Joanna forgot to breathe. Samuel shifted beside her. Christopher continued more quietly. "I remember his arm. I remember being unable to get my feet beneath me. I remember him telling me to keep my head back." His brow tightened. "After that, there are pieces. Nothing I would swear to." Joanna had imagined many impossible gifts during the worst nights after Daniel's death. His return, a final letter, one living witness, willing to say that he had not been a fool. She had stopped imagining because hope had become another way to injure herself. Now Christopher Brockhurst had offered neither exoneration nor certainty, only a fragment, somehow that felt more trustworthy. "Mr. Harcourt said, 'Your Grace, your recollection may be affected by the injury.'" "Of course." Christopher's answer came without defensiveness. "Then don't use it as evidence yet, but neither will anyone in this house repeat Daniel Norris's guilt as established fact until we review what was sworn and what can still be proved." Joanna looked at him. "You would reopen it?" "I would read it." Conrad gave the principal account. "Then I will read Conrad's account." Samuel's spinning top slipped from his fingers and struck the carpet. It rolled beneath the edge of the table. Joanna bent at the same moment Christopher did. His injured leg slowed him, but both reached the toy together. Their gloved fingers touched over the worn walnut. The contact lasted no more than a heartbeat. Joanna withdrew first. Christopher did the same, immediately and without pretending not to have noticed. He lifted the top by its wooden stem and examined the scratched brass point before handing it to Samuel. On the underside, Daniel's initials had been cut shallowly into the wood. "DN," Christopher said. Samuel nodded. "Papa made it." Christopher turned the top once between his fingers. He had patient hands. Joanna looked at him sharply. "Do you remember that?" "No." He gave the toy back to Samuel. "I can see it." The distinction mattered. Joanna felt it settle between them. Christopher looked toward Harcourt. "Where are the original inquest papers?" "In my Winchester archive." "And the ferry?" "About 11 miles from here." Christopher pushed himself carefully upright. The movement drew a brief line of pain through his face, but he did not hide it behind bravado. "Then bring me the inquest papers tomorrow." He glanced at Joanna, "And after I read them, I want to see the ferry." Joanna held his gaze. "So do I." The first thing Joanna noticed at Brockhurst Ferry was how easy it would have been to believe a lie there. By the time their carriage reached the tidal creek, shortly before 11, on February 11th. The winter sky had flattened to a hard grey, and the reeds along the bank hissed whenever the wind crossed them. The ferry platform leaned slightly toward the water, its boards dark with damp. Nothing about the place looked dramatic enough to have divided her life into before and after. That was almost worse. Daniel had died here, and the creek had gone on moving, as though it had no memory at all. Joanna remained seated for a moment after Mr. Harcourt descended. "Mrs. Belle followed him, gathering her skirts clear of the mud. Christopher stepped down last. He had accepted the walking stick Harcourt pressed upon him before they left Foxley, though the look he gave the solicitor suggested he considered it a personal insult disguised as medical prudence. The 11-mile journey had stiffened his right leg. He stood quietly until the discomfort passed, then looked toward Joanna rather than pretending she had not noticed. "You do not have to come farther," he said. Joanna rested one gloved hand on the carriage door. "Neither do you. I came here to remember. I came here because Daniel cannot." Christopher's expression changed. "That was not meant as an argument." "I know." She stepped down without accepting assistance from the coachman until the last moment required it. "And my answer is no. I do not want to leave." Christopher inclined his head. "Then we stay." He did not tell her she was brave. Joanna was grateful. Before departing Foxley that morning, Christopher had read the official inquest summary Mr. Harcourt brought from Winchester. It repeated what Joanna already knew. Daniel Norris had been judged to have interfered with the crossing and contributed to the disaster. Lord Conrad Brockhurst had supplied the principal surviving account. Harcourt had not yet produced every signed witness deposition from the archive. Those remained among a second packet he intended to review once they returned. Christopher had said little while reading the summary. He had only placed one finger over Daniel's name and asked, "Was anyone else questioned?" Harcourt had answered, "The ferryman." Isaac Pruett. His statement was treated as confused. Now they found Isaac in a weathered cottage beyond the abandoned landing, splitting kindling beneath a lean-to. He was a broad man in his late 40s, his beard threaded with grey. The moment he recognized Christopher, the hatchet slipped from his hand and struck the chopping block sideways. "Your Grace." Christopher stopped several yards away. "Mr. Pruett." Isaac stared at the scar at his temple and then at the walking stick. "They said you were dead, so I have discovered." Isaac's eyes moved to Joanna. Recognition there was different. Shame entered it. Mrs. Norris. Joanna had met him only once before Daniel died. He had been talkative then. Today his shoulders seemed built around silence. Mr. Harcourt stepped forward. "We have questions about the 3rd of July. Isaac picked up the hatchet, though he did not resume chopping. "I told the inquest what I remembered." "You told them very little," Harcourt said. "That was all I had to tell." Christopher looked toward the ferry. "Then you will not object if we look at the landing." Isaac's jaw tightened. "It is estate property." "At present, so am I." Harcourt made a sound that might have been a cough. Christopher glanced at him. "Legally speaking, Your Grace, people are not estate property." "Then strike that from the record." For the first time, Isaac's expression nearly broke. Joanna saw the man he had been before fear settled back over him. They crossed toward the ferry shelter. The structure was little more than a timber room beneath a low loft with rusted hooks along one wall and old tackle stacked near the rear. Joanna could smell hemp, river damp, and decaying wood. Her heartbeat became unsteady. She did not know where Daniel had stood. She did not know which board his boot had touched last. She refused to invent sacred ground merely because grief wanted somewhere to kneel. Isaac remained outside the shelter. "There is nothing here." Joanna turned. "Then why are you afraid of us? Looking?" His face hardened. "I am not afraid. Your hands say otherwise." He glanced down. His fingers were clenched around his cap. Joanna stepped nearer, but not enough to crowd him. "Mr. Pruett, I will not promise that speaking will cost you nothing. I cannot promise your employment. I cannot promise what Lord Conrad will do. I cannot promise what the Dowager Duchess will do. Isaac's eyes sharpened at the title. Joanna continued, but I will not threaten your cottage, your wages, your sister, or your name to make you give me the answer I want. Christopher did not interrupt. Neither did Harcourt. Isaac looked toward the creek. My sister is widowed. I know only that she depends upon you, Joanna said. That is enough to make fear reasonable. You think fear makes a man honest? No, I think pretending not to be afraid makes him easier to control. Silence followed. Then Isaac walked past them into the shelter. He reached for a narrow ladder fixed to the rear wall and climbed into the loft. Christopher started forward. Joanna caught the motion from the corner of her eye, but he stopped himself. His injured leg would have made the climb foolish. Isaac disappeared above them. Boards creaked. Something heavy dragged across timber. A moment later he descended, carrying a dark coil of rope over one shoulder. He lowered it carefully onto the floor. Mr. Harcourt crouched first. Joanna remained standing, unable to understand why the sight of ordinary hemp made her throat close. The line was heavy and aged, darkened by storage, but not rotten. Near one end, a band of white whipping had yellowed with time. Christopher stared at it. What is this? Isaac looked at him. The rescue line. Harcourt's head lifted. The one from the ferry? Yes. Why is it here? Isaac swallowed. Because I took it down after the inquest and hid it where no one would burn it, replace it, or lose it. Joanna looked from the line to his face. Why? Isaac's answer came slowly. Lord Conrad said he threw the rescue line after the ferry overturned. Christopher went very still. Joanna had not yet heard the signed deposition itself, only the official summary. And did he? Isaac shook his head. No. Harcourt touched neither the rope nor the man. What did Lord Conrad say happened to it? That it snapped. The shelter seemed to contract around them. Christopher looked at the intact coil. This line? This line? Isaac's voice roughened. It never snapped. Joanna forced herself to ask the next question. Was another line used? No. Was this one thrown into the water? No. Isaac looked directly at Christopher now. It was never thrown. For several seconds, only the creak could be heard beyond the boards. Mr. Harcourt opened his leather memorandum case. His voice became precise. Mr. Pruett, from this moment forward, I do not want this line moved except under witness transfer. Do you understand? Isaac nodded. Harcourt turned to Joanna and Christopher. Mrs. Norris, Your Grace, Mrs. Bell, you will each observe. Mrs. Bell stepped into the shelter and adjusted her spectacles with visible determination. Harcourt asked Isaac to state that the line had remained in his possession since he removed it from ferry stores after the inquest. Isaac did so. Then, in full view of all four witnesses, he lifted the coil and placed it into Harcourt's hands. Harcourt wrapped it in clean canvas, brought from the carriage, and tied the bundle himself. Custody is now mine, he said. It remains mine until properly examined. Christopher nodded. Joanna did not touch the canvas. She did not need to. For 7 months, Daniel had been dead beneath a story that said rescue had failed despite Conrad's effort. Now the object, supposedly broken in that effort, lay whole at Mr. Harcourt's feet. Christopher looked at Isaac. Why did you let the inquest stand? Isaac's face closed again. I did not. Not at first. Joanna felt the next answer coming before he gave it. What did you do? Isaac looked toward Foxley's direction, invisible beyond 11 miles of Winter Road. I went there the morning after the inquest. I asked to speak to someone who could stop what was being said. Harcourt's eyes narrowed. Who? Isaac picked up his cap. "If you want to know why I stopped speaking, ask who received me at Foxley. By the morning of February 12th, the rope had become more difficult for Joanna to think about than the creek itself. The water at Brockhurst Ferry had taken Daniel and left no explanation behind. The rope was different. It was solid, measurable, intact. It had weight. It had passed from Isaac Pruitt's hands directly into Mr. Harcourt's witnessed custody, and it now remained wrapped in canvas inside the solicitor's locked travelling case at Foxley Hall. Conrad had sworn that a rescue line snapped. Isaac had said the line was never thrown. One of those accounts could not survive the other. Joanna sat in the open morning room with a cup of tea cooling untouched beside her. Mrs. Bell worked at a small table in the adjoining passage, where she could see the doorway without pretending to listen. Christopher stood near the fire, one hand resting on the mantel. The journey to the ferry had worsened the stiffness in his right leg. He had refused to spend the morning in bed, but he moved with more care than he had the day before. Joanna had learned not to mistake silence for ease. "You should sit," she said. Christopher glanced at her. "You sound like Harcourt." "Mr. Harcourt is often correct when he is least pleasant about it." "That is an alarming defense of solicitors." "I said often. Not always." The corner of his mouth shifted. He lowered himself into the chair opposite her. The brief humor disappeared as soon as his gaze moved toward the window. "I dreamed of the water." Joanna's fingers tightened around the handle of her cup. He had not spoken of dreams before. "Do you remember more?" "I do not know." Christopher looked down at his hands. "That is the part I dislike most. A memory should feel different from a nightmare. Mine do not always oblige." Joanna waited. He drew a slow breath. "There is cold, not the ordinary cold of winter, the kind that steals your breath before you understand you have lost it." His voice remained controlled, but his fingers had curled against his knee. "I remember trying to lift my head and failing, then an arm beneath my chin." Joanna did not move. "Daniel, I believe so." "Believe?" Christopher met her eyes. "I know his voice was close to me. I know someone was keeping my face above the water. I associate both with Daniel. I will not tell you I remember his face if I do not." Joanna felt something in her chest loosen despite the pain of hearing it. "Good." Christopher's brow lifted slightly. "Good. I would rather have what is uncertain than be comforted by something invented." He studied her for a moment. "You say that as though you have been offered invented comfort before. For 7 months. Joanna looked toward the fire. "People told me Daniel meant well, that he panicked because he was not accustomed to danger, that I should remember him as a loving husband rather than ask whether the accusation against him was true." She gave a quiet breath without humor. It is astonishing how quickly kindness becomes an instruction to stop asking questions. Christopher's face hardened. "And you did not stop?" "No." "Why?" Joanna looked at him again. "Because Daniel could be foolish. He could be stubborn. He once argued for 20 minutes that a leaking stable roof could survive another winter because he disliked the mason's estimate." Christopher almost smiled. That sounds specific. It was raining into a feed room while he argued. Did the roof survive? No. Neither did his argument. The smile came then, brief and real. Joanna felt the answering pull of one in herself, but resisted it. "I knew my husband," she continued. "I do not need him turned into a saint because he died. But if he made a fatal mistake, I want the truth. If he did not, I want that truth too." Christopher's expression became still. "There is something else." Joanna waited. "I remember shouting." He closed his eyes, not theatrically, but as though reducing the room helped him listen inward. Or someone shouting near me. A word repeated. Line, perhaps. Rope. His brow tightened. I think it was line. Joanna's pulse quickened. Isaac, possibly. Daniel, possibly. I cannot separate the voices. Do not force it. His eyes opened. You are remarkably willing to leave useful information unfinished. Useful and true are not the same thing. Christopher leaned back. That is precisely what frightens me. Joanna said nothing. If I tell a room full of county gentlemen that I remember Conrad standing on the bank, they may believe me because I am the Duke of Woldingham, not because my memory deserves belief. His gaze dropped briefly to the scar at his left temple, reflected faintly in the dark window glass. A title can make uncertainty sound authoritative. Then do not let it. The answer came before Joanna could soften it. Christopher looked at her. That simple? No, that difficult. Silence rested between them. It did not feel empty. Joanna had expected Christopher's return to bring authority back into Foxley. She had not expected him to be frightened of using it wrongly. Before either spoke again, quick footsteps sounded in the passage. Samuel appeared at the open doorway, with his walnut top in one hand. Mrs. Bell looked over her spectacles. Master Samuel, I was under the impression your lessons involved numbers. They do. The top has 1 point. Mrs. Bell stared at him, an argument worthy of Parliament. Samuel entered before Joanna could send him back. Mamma, it does not spin properly. It spun yesterday. Not properly. He held it toward Christopher with complete faith that a returned duke was naturally qualified to repair toys. Can you do it? Christopher looked at Joanna first. It was such a small gesture that Samuel did not notice, but Joanna did. He was asking without words whether the child was welcome near him. Joanna gave a slight nod. Christopher accepted the top. I should warn you that my experience with engineering is limited. Samuel frowned. It is a top. That increases the pressure considerably. Christopher set the walnut toy on the polished table and twisted the stem between his fingers. The top spun once, leaned violently, and fell against a stack of correspondence. Samuel stared at it. Christopher stared at it. I believe, he said gravely, that your complaint is justified. Joanna laughed. The sound escaped before she could stop it. She covered her mouth too late. Samuel beamed as though he had accomplished something. Christopher did not look at the fallen top. He looked at Joanna. For one suspended second, the morning room changed. She was no longer only Daniel's widow. Speaking to the man Daniel may have died saving. Christopher was no longer only a damaged duke, carrying fragments of the worst day of both their lives. Joanna became suddenly aware of the warmth in his expression, and of how long it had been since a man had looked at her because she was laughing, rather than because she was bereaved. The awareness unsettled her. Christopher seemed to feel the same shift. His hand moved slightly from the table, as though he meant to offer it across the narrow space between them. He stopped before the gesture became touch. Then he picked up Samuel's top instead and handed it back. I recommend professional intervention. Samuel took it solemnly. From a top maker, if such a profession exists, we must find the finest one in Hampshire. It only needs practice, Joanna said. Christopher looked at her again. That is less expensive. Samuel left under Mrs. Bell's supervision, already attempting another spin in the corridor. The room had barely settled when Mr. Harcourt entered, carrying a calf-bound packet. His expression erased the last trace of humor. I found the original deposition. Christopher straightened. Conrad's? Yes. Harcourt placed the packet on the table and opened it to a marked page. There is one sentence you both need to hear before anything else. Joanna felt the laughter leave her completely. Harcourt read from Conrad's signed statement. I seized the rescue line from its hook and threw it toward His Grace and Mr. Norris. The line took their weight and snapped while I was holding it. Christopher stared at him. Joanna looked toward the closed door beyond which Harcourt's locked case held the intact rope. Harcourt lowered the page. Lord, Conrad did not merely say a line broke, he said. He swore that he threw it. He also swore that it snapped in his own hands. By the morning of February 13th, Joanna understood that a lie became more dangerous when it was written in a calm hand. Mr. Harcourt had arranged the original inquest papers across the long table in Foxley Hall's study shortly after breakfast. The rescue line was not among them. It remained wrapped in clean canvas inside the solicitor's locked travelling case, exactly where Harcourt had placed it after Isaac Pruett transferred custody to him at the ferry. Joanna was glad not to see it. The intact rope had already said what it could. Today, the danger lay in the words men had chosen after Daniel was dead. Christopher sat at the head of the table because his right leg had stiffened after the journey 2 days earlier. He looked less pale than he had on returning to Foxley, but fatigue still drew deeper lines around his eyes. Joanna took the chair opposite. Mr. Harcourt opened Conrad's signed deposition. I will read only the portions material to what we now know. Christopher nodded. Good. Harcourt began. According to Conrad, Daniel had become impatient with the delay caused by the current and interfered with Isaac's direction of the ferry. He had moved at an unsafe moment, contributed to the vessel becoming unstable, and, after the capsize, had behaved with such panic that Christopher's rescue became more difficult. Conrad stated that he himself reached the shallows, seized the rescue line, and threw it toward both men. The line supposedly took their weight and snapped while he held it. Joanna kept her hands folded in her lap. She had heard softened versions of those accusations for 7 months. Reading them in Conrad's exact account made the cruelty clearer. He had not called Daniel malicious. He had called him frightened, foolish, and well-intentioned. It was a kinder form of destruction, because respectable people could repeat it without admitting they were insulting the dead. Harcourt lowered the page. Christopher's expression had gone very still. There is no ambiguity in that sentence. No, Harcourt said. Lord Conrad did not merely say that some rope failed. He swore that he personally threw the rescue line and felt it snap. Christopher looked toward the locked case on the far side of the room. And the line in your custody is intact. Yes, but we must remain precise. We have Isaac Pruett's word that it is the ferry rescue line. We have not yet independently established its manufacture or provenance. Joanna appreciated the distinction even while it frustrated her, so Conrad can say Isaac substituted another rope. He can, Harcourt replied, and he almost certainly will if pressed. Christopher's jaw tightened. Then we prove what can be proved. Joanna looked down as Harcourt turned another sheet. Beneath the deposition lay an older ferry maintenance account. A narrow line of handwriting ran beside a notation about replacing a weathered pulley. Joanna stopped breathing for a moment. She knew that handwriting before she understood the words. Daniel always crossed the final stroke of his capital H too low. His figures leaned slightly to the right when he was tired. The note read that the pulley might last another season, but delay would cost more if the housing split. Nothing important. Nothing connected to his death. That was what hurt. Daniel had once sat somewhere warm with a pencil, and worried about a pulley. He had expected to be alive long enough to complain about its cost the following spring. Joanna touched the edge of the paper, but not the writing itself. "That is Daniel's hand." Harcourt glanced down. Yes, the maintenance account was among the ferry papers. Christopher looked at her. He did not offer sympathy. He waited. Joanna swallowed. He always wrote like that when he thought someone was wasting money. "Was he often right?" Christopher asked quietly, frequently enough to become insufferable. The answer nearly steadied her. Harcourt allowed the silence to pass before closing the maintenance ledger. "There is something else." Joanna lifted her eyes. "About Isaac?" "Yes." Harcourt removed his spectacles. "Before we left the ferry on the 11th, after you and His Grace had gone outside toward the carriage, and Mrs. Bell was supervising the canvas wrapping, as though I intended to steal my own evidence, I asked Pruitt, who received him at Foxley after the inquest. From the adjoining room came the faint sound of Mrs. Bell moving something with unnecessary force. Christopher almost smiled, and Harcourt's expression sharpened. The Dowager Duchess. Christopher's amusement vanished. "Elizabeth?" "Yes." Joanna felt cold. "Isaac went to her himself, the morning after the inquest. He asked to be received because he believed Conrad's statement about the rescue line was wrong." "What exactly did he tell her?" Christopher asked. "Only what he has authorized me to repeat at this stage. He told her Lord Conrad had not thrown the line." Joanna leaned forward, and she already knew Conrad had sworn that he had. "Yes. What did she do?" Harcourt looked from Joanna to Christopher. "She did not say, 'Keep silent or lose your home.'" Pruitt was quite clear about that. Joanna already understood what was coming. She did not need to. Harcourt nodded. Her Grace reminded him that his reputation was not unblemished. She reminded him that his employment came through the Brockhurst estate. Then she mentioned that his widowed sister occupied a cottage on Brockhurst land and depended upon his wages. Christopher's fingers flattened slowly against the table. That was a threat. It was phrased so that she could later deny threatening anything. Joanna stared at Daniel's maintenance note. A pulley, a ferry, a husband who had died under another man's version of events. People with power rarely need to say the ugliest sentence aloud. Harcourt did not disagree. Christopher said, "Did Isaac tell her anything else about the accident?" "Not that he has authorized me to repeat. He remains frightened, and I will not turn a partial confidence into a complete testimony, because it would be convenient." Joanna looked at the solicitor. "Good." Christopher's gaze shifted to her. "You do not want to know?" "Of course I want to know." Her voice tightened. "I have wanted to know for 7 months. That does not give me the right to invent the missing pieces or tear them out of a frightened man before he is willing to speak." She looked again at Conrad's deposition. "Daniel died. Samuel was 5. I was told my husband had panicked and nearly killed a duke. Isaac tried to say that one central part of that story was false, and Elizabeth reminded him what truth might cost his sister." Joanna's composure slipped at last, not into tears but into anger, so quiet that it seemed to sharpen every word. "How many people knew enough to doubt the story while I was being advised to accept it gracefully?" Christopher said her name softly. "Joanna." It was the first time he had used it. She looked at him. His hand moved across the table, then stopped well before reaching hers. He turned his palm upward. "May I?" The question struck harder than consolation would have. Joanna had spent months receiving instructions about how to grieve, where to live, what not to ask, and which humiliations respectable widows endured without complaint. Christopher did not decide what comfort she needed. He asked. Joanna looked at his open hand. Then she placed her gloved fingers into it. He closed his hand gently around hers. No pressure, no claim, only warmth passing slowly through the leather. Joanna let herself remain there. His thumb moved once against the side of her glove and became still. "I am sorry," he said. "Not because I survived. I will not apologize for that. But while I was gone, people used my name to make your grief easier to dismiss." Joanna held his gaze. "Then help me prove what happened. Do not make me an object of pity." "I don't." The answer came without hesitation. She believed him. After another breath, Joanna withdrew her hand. Christopher released it immediately. Mr. Harcourt looked down at his papers with the determined concentration of a man who had discovered excellent reasons not to observe either of them. A knock sounded at the study door. The steward entered, carrying a folded note on a small silver tray. "Your Grace." A message from Her Grace the Dowager Duchess. Christopher took it and broke the seal. His eyes moved across the page once. "She intends to come to Foxley tomorrow morning." Joanna felt the room tighten. The steward had not finished. "Her Grace also asks that Lady Merton and Mrs. Vale be received. They have expressed a wish to welcome your Grace home." Joanna looked at Conrad's deposition, then at Christopher. Elizabeth was not coming alone. She was bringing an audience. Sewer Elizabeth Brockhurst arrived at Foxley Hall shortly after 10 on the morning of February 14th, exactly when her note had promised, and with exactly the audience Joanna had expected. Lady Merton's carriage followed within minutes. Mrs. Vale came so soon afterward that the three arrivals could still pretend coincidence while making coincidence impossible to believe. The Dowager Duchess entered the smaller drawing room in black silk trimmed with jet, carrying mourning as elegantly as other women carried jewels. She embraced Christopher with controlled affection, stepped back to examine the scar at his left temple, and then looked toward the walking stick beside his chair. "My dear Christopher, you look terribly thin. I have been working on it." Elizabeth's lips moved faintly. "You always did use humor when you wanted people not to worry. And you always worried most when there was an audience." Lady Merton studied the fire. Mrs. Vale adjusted one glove. Joanna remained beside the writing table, because several estate inventories lay open there under Mr. Harcourt's authority. She had considered withdrawing before the callers arrived. Then she had understood that leaving merely because Elizabeth wished her uncomfortable would make absence look like admission. Samuel was safely with the former nurse in the East apartments. Whatever happened, Joanna would not allow her son to watch strangers debate whether his mother was respectable enough to remain beneath the roof where she worked. Elizabeth finally turned toward her. "Mrs. Norris." Joanna inclined her head. "Your Grace, I confess I was surprised to learn you were still residing at Foxley. Mr. Harcourt's arrangement has not ended." "No, I suppose recent events have interrupted many arrangements." Her voice held no open insult. That was what made Joanna listen more carefully. Elizabeth seated herself near Lady Merton. "I hope you understand that my concern is not unkind. A young widow should be protected from unnecessary speculation." Joanna felt the first pressure beneath the courtesy. What speculation? Elizabeth glanced toward Christopher before answering. "Christopher has returned after a severe injury. His memory is not fully restored. You have suffered a bereavement connected to the same terrible event. Circumstances place both of you in a rather delicate position. Christopher's expression cooled. Joanna answered before he could. My position is not delicate. It is documented. I remain here under Mr. Harcourt's written authority to complete estate inventories and correspondence. I meant your social position. That, too, is documented. I am Daniel Norris's widow. Lady Merton looked quickly toward her cup. Elizabeth's smile remained gracious. Precisely, and grief can make proximity difficult to interpret. Joanna held her gaze. For whom? For society. Society has survived greater difficulties. Mrs. Vale made a small sound that might have been disguised laughter. Elizabeth ignored it. Mrs. Norris, I am trying to spare you. An unmarried duke has returned to his own house. A young widow resides beneath the same roof. He is recovering memories of the disaster in which her husband died. Surely you see how easily innocent circumstances could acquire an unfortunate appearance. Joanna felt the insult settle fully into place. Elizabeth was not accusing her of improper behavior. She was doing something more useful. She was creating a version of events that required no proof. Joanna folded the inventory sheet she had been holding and set it down. If anyone wishes to accuse me of improper conduct, Your Grace, I would prefer they possess the courage to use the words. Elizabeth's eyes sharpened. No one has accused you of anything. Then perhaps no one should describe my lawful work as a danger to my reputation. Christopher shifted in his chair. The movement made the stiffness in his right leg visible, but his voice was steady. Elizabeth. She turned to him. I'm only thinking of you. Then think more carefully. The room went quiet. Christopher continued. Mrs. Norris's residence here is lawful. Her duties were assigned by Harcourt. Nothing improper has occurred, and her character will not be offered for drawing-room examination, because someone finds her presence inconvenient. Elizabeth's color altered slightly. You misunderstand me. I don't think I do. Christopher, you have been home for 5 days. Yes, your recollection is still uncertain. Also, yes. Her voice softened. Then, can you be certain Mrs. Norris's constant presence is wise? She lost Daniel. She has every reason to want his name cleared. She speaks with you about the accident. You are trying to recover what happened. Grief can influence even honorable people without their knowing it. Joanna felt a colder anger than before. There it was. Elizabeth had moved from propriety to memory. She did not need to know that the rescue line had survived. She did not need physical evidence at all. She needed only to make every future recollection Christopher recovered suspect, because Joanna had been near him when it returned. Christopher rose. He did so slowly, with one hand briefly braced against the chair as his injured thigh resisted him. No one could mistake the effort. No one could mistake the authority either. Enough. Elizabeth stared at him. I haven't insulted her. You suggested a grieving widow might shape the memories of an injured man merely by being present. I said grief can be persuasive. Then let mine persuade you. His voice remained low. Mrs. Norris has never told me what to remember. She has corrected me when I claimed more certainty than I possessed. She went to the ferry because she chose to, not because I required it. Her character is not the subject of this call. Lady Merton rose almost immediately. I fear I have stayed longer than I intended. Mrs. Vale followed with remarkable speed. Elizabeth remained seated for 3 more breaths. Then she stood and fastened one glove with deliberate care. You are tired, Christopher. Possibly. And still vulnerable. Also possible. Then I hope you will forgive those who are cautious for you. Christopher looked at her. Caution investigates. It doesn't insinuate. Elizabeth's gaze moved to Joanna. For the first time that morning, all softness disappeared. The look lasted less than a second. Joanna understood it completely. Elizabeth was afraid. Not of Joanna's widowhood, not even of gossip. She was afraid of what questions might become possible if Christopher continued listening to the wrong people. "I will call again," Elizabeth said. "Send notice first," Christopher replied. After she left, the drawing room seemed larger. Joanna remained standing until the sound of the Dowager Duchess's carriage faded beyond the front drive. Christopher lowered himself back into the chair. The strain in his leg had worsened, and this time he did not pretend otherwise. Joanna crossed to the opposite chair. "You did not need to answer for me. I know." "You could have let me answer her." "I did." Christopher looked at her. "Until she used my injury to accuse you of influencing me." Joanna considered that. Fair. Silence settled between them. Then Christopher's expression changed. His attention shifted beyond her towards something she could not see. "There is a fragment." Joanna went still. "Now, not from this room." His hand tightened around the arm of the chair. "The bank." He closed his eyes briefly. "A man standing above the water. I cannot see his face. I think I hear him saying, 'We can't reach them.' Or perhaps, 'I can't reach them.'" Joanna resisted every question that tried to rise. "Do you know who he was?" Christopher opened his eyes. "No." "Then leave it there." "Yes." His gaze held hers for a moment. "You make uncertainty sound less like failure." "Only because certainty has caused enough trouble." Something gentler entered his face. He turned one hand, palm upward on the space between their chairs. This time he did not ask aloud. He had already learned that she understood the question. Joanna looked at his hand. Elizabeth's accusation still hung somewhere in the house, suggesting that every kindness between them must be suspicious. Joanna refused to let another woman's cruelty decide what she was permitted to accept. She placed her gloved hand in Christopher's. His fingers closed around hers. Neither spoke. The contact lasted longer than it had in the study the day before. There was no urgency in it, no attempt to draw her nearer. When Christopher's fingers began to loosen, giving her the choice to withdraw, Joanna tightened hers first. His eyes lifted to hers. The moment changed. Not into love, not yet, into something quieter and more dangerous, because both of them recognized it. Joanna released him when she chose. Christopher let her go at once. A servant appeared at the doorway, carrying a folded card. "Your Grace, from Lord Conrad." Christopher broke the seal and read. His expression hardened. He requests a formal estate luncheon tomorrow. Joanna already knew the reason before he continued. "Trustees, several county gentlemen, and family witnesses." Christopher folded the card once. "He wants the ferry discussed before all of them." Joanna looked toward the door through which Elizabeth had left. "Then tomorrow he gets his audience." By noon on February 15th, the great dining room at Foxley Hall had been opened for the first formal estate gathering since Christopher's return. And Joanna understood before the soup was removed that Lord Conrad Brockhurst had chosen the room as carefully as he had chosen his witnesses. The table had been shortened to accommodate 12, but the high ceiling and dark ancestral portraits made every voice seem more public than it was. 2 estate trustees sat near Mr. Harcourt. 3 county gentlemen occupied the opposite side. Elizabeth Brockhurst wore black silk and composed concern. Conrad sat at Christopher's right, with the easy posture of a man who had spent 7 months being obeyed in rooms that technically belonged to someone else. Joanna had been placed farther down the table beside an elderly trustee and his wife. It was a respectful position, but not an equal one. Samuel remained with the former nurse in the east apartments. Joanna had refused to let her son hear men discuss whether his father had died as a coward. Christopher entered last, using his walking stick without apology. His right leg had stiffened after the previous day, but his expression revealed nothing beyond fatigue. He looked once toward Joanna before taking his place. No smile passed between them. The memory of her hand tightening around his remained private. The luncheon began with estate repairs, tenant accounts, and polite questions about Christopher's health. Conrad allowed nearly 20 minutes of harmless conversation before setting down his glass. There is a matter we should address while the relevant people are present. Christopher looked at him. You arranged the relevant people, because uncertainty is becoming harmful. To whom? Conrad's smile was faint. To the family, to the estate, perhaps most of all to you. Elizabeth lowered her eyes, as if the answer pained her. Joanna felt the shape of the attack before it arrived. Conrad turned slightly toward the trustees. My brother has returned after a severe head injury and months of uncertain memory. That is a blessing none of us expected. It is also a circumstance that requires care. Christopher's voice remained calm. You may discuss my memory in front of me. I intend to. Conrad rested one hand beside his plate. The original inquest accepted my account because I was the clearest surviving witness able to describe the accident. Daniel Norris interfered with the crossing. The ferry overturned, and after the capsize, I attempted to throw the rescue line. Joanna kept her face still. Attempted? Mr. Harcourt asked. Conrad glanced toward him. Through it. The line failed. Christopher's gaze sharpened. Your signed statement says it snapped in your hands. Yes. Conrad did not hesitate. That is what I remember. And I remember Daniel trying to keep me alive, Christopher said. Conrad turned toward him with almost brotherly sorrow. Now you do. The room became quiet. Joanna saw Christopher's fingers settle more firmly around the head of his walking stick. Conrad continued. When you returned 5 days ago, you remembered little beyond water and Norris's presence. Since then, you have spent hours speaking with his widow. You have visited the ferry with her. You have heard her grief. You have listened to her objections to the inquest. Joanna felt the elderly trustee's wife beside her stop moving. Lord Conrad, Harcourt said, choose your next words carefully. I am choosing them very carefully. Conrad looked toward Joanna. Mrs. Norris has every reason to want her husband's name cleared. No decent person could fault her for that. But desire can shape the questions we ask. Repetition can shape recollection. A wounded memory can become particularly vulnerable when everyone around it wants one answer more than another. Elizabeth spoke softly. Grief can make honorable people persuasive without their intending harm. Joanna understood the cruelty immediately. They were not accusing her of lying. They were accusing her of being dangerous without knowing it. Christopher's face had gone pale beneath the scar at his temple. Mrs. Norris has never told me what to remember. Conrad turned back to him. How could you know? The question struck harder than any insult directed at Joanna. A man with damaged memory could not prove he had not been influenced. Christopher's uncertainty had become the weapon. One trustee cleared his throat. This is becoming unnecessarily personal. It became personal when Mrs. Norris's interpretation of her husband's death began appearing inside Christopher's recollections, Conrad said. Joanna rose. Her chair made a small sound against the floorboards. Every face turned toward her. Christopher looked at her as well, but he did not tell her to sit. He did not take the argument from her. Joanna placed both hands lightly against the edge of the table. "You may question my grief if you wish," she said. "You may question my judgment. You may even decide that His Grace's recovered memories are too uncertain to rely upon." Conrad's eyes narrowed. "That is precisely my point." Then set His Grace's memory aside. Joanna looked toward Mr. Harcourt. "Answer the rope." Silence fell so completely that the crackle from the dining room fire seemed loud. Mr. Harcourt rose. From beside his chair, he lifted the canvas-wrapped bundle he had brought from his secured custody that morning. Christopher's gaze remained on Joanna. Elizabeth looked at the bundle with genuine confusion. Conrad's face changed less, but Joanna saw calculation replace confidence. Harcourt untied the outer cord and drew back the canvas. The heavy hemp line appeared across the polished table, its white whipping yellowed with age. "This line was transferred directly into my custody by Isaac Pruett on February 11th, Harcourt said. "The transfer was witnessed by His Grace, Mrs. Norris, and Mrs. Bell. It has remained under my control since." One of the county gentlemen leaned forward. Elizabeth's eyes fixed upon the intact coil. For the first time, Joanna knew the Dowager Duchess had not known it survived. Conrad looked at Harcourt. "Pruett claims that is the ferry line?" "Yes. A dismissed ferryman with a grievance produces a rope 7 months later, and you call that proof?" "I call it evidence requiring examination," Harcourt replied. Joanna looked directly at Conrad. "You swore the rescue line snapped." "I swore a rescue line snapped." "You swore you threw it yourself and felt it snap in your hands." Conrad's jaw tightened, and this could be another line. The answer came quickly enough that Joanna knew. He had found the only defense available. Elizabeth recovered first. "Surely that is possible. Estate stores contain many ropes." "Not many rescue lines with identical age and finishing," Harcourt said. "We do not yet know whether those features are unique." Conrad leaned back. "Then you admit it proves nothing?" "Not yet," Joanna said. He looked at her. Joanna continued. "That is why we will not ask His Grace to remember more for your convenience. We will establish whether this line belongs to the ferry without using his memory at all." A trustee near Christopher rubbed one thumb along the stem of his glass. "There should be records, Mr. Norris kept thorough maintenance accounts." "He did," Joanna said. The trustee nodded slowly. "During the months, His Grace was believed dead. Lord Conrad was acting as the family's principal representative. I recall several discussions about what authority he might eventually exercise if the succession were settled." Conrad turned sharply. "What has that to do with a rope?" "Perhaps nothing," the trustee replied. "I only mean that questions of estate control have hardly been abstract since July." Joanna saw the smallest fracture in Conrad's composure. It vanished almost immediately. Christopher noticed it too, but he said nothing. The suggestion proved no wrongdoing at the ferry, and Joanna would not misuse it. Yet a new question had entered the room. Conrad had not simply defended an old memory. Christopher's return had taken away a future Conrad had already begun to inhabit. Elizabeth spoke with quiet displeasure. "This is precisely how rumor begins." Joanna looked at her. "Then we should avoid rumor." She pointed, not at Conrad, but at the line. "Who supplied the ferry ropes, Mr.?" Harcourt's expression sharpened. "Daniel's maintenance accounts may show it." "Then find the supplier." Conrad gave a short laugh. "You expect a tradesman to remember one rope from years ago." "I expect him to tell us what he knows," Joanna said. "Nothing more," Christopher finally spoke, "and nothing less." Conrad looked from brother to widow. "You seem very certain this will help you." Joanna met his gaze. I am certain only that the rope exists. That answer landed more heavily than triumph would have. She sat again. Mr. Harcourt rewrapped the line and returned it immediately to his own custody. The luncheon had been arranged to make Joanna appear dependent upon Christopher's damaged mind. Instead, she had removed his memory from the argument altogether. Christopher did not smile at her across the table, but the respect in his expression was unmistakable. After the guests began to disperse, Harcourt opened Daniel's copied maintenance index beside the dining room window. His finger stopped on an old entry. There is a name. Joanna stepped closer. Who? Elias Mercer, ropemaker, Winchester Road. Christopher looked toward Conrad, who had paused near the door. Is he still trading? Harcourt closed the index. I will know before evening. Joanna looked at the canvas bundle beneath the solicitor's hand. Then tomorrow, she said, we ask the man who made it. By the morning of February 16th, Joanna had stopped worrying about whether Hampshire believed her and begun worrying only about what could still be proved. Lord Conrad's luncheon had done one useful thing. It had stripped the argument down to its weakest point. If the rope was not the original rescue line, then the physical contradiction might collapse. If it was, Conrad's signed account would have to explain an object that had refused to break, simply because a gentleman had sworn that it did. Mr. Harcourt had spent the evening following entries through Daniel's maintenance ledgers and old supplier accounts. Shortly after breakfast, he left Joanna and Christopher in Foxley Hall's study with 2 copied invoices on the table and the rescue line still secured inside his locked traveling case in the adjoining room. Elias Mercer, Joanna said, reading the name again. Winchester Road. Christopher sat opposite her, one hand resting near the walking stick, propped against his chair. His right leg had been worse after the previous day's luncheon, though he had not complained. Harcourt says Mercer supplied 3 rescue lines in 1854, under a standing estate contract. Joanna traced the copied entry with one finger. Hemp line, hooks, pulleys, tarred cord. Daniel recorded the order himself. Christopher looked toward the invoice, but did not reach for it. If Mercer remembers his own work, Conrad's replacement argument weakens. If Mercer does not remember, we keep looking. You make failure sound temporary. Joanna looked at him. It usually is, unless people become fond of it. A faint smile appeared, then disappeared. Christopher had been quieter since the luncheon, not withdrawn exactly, more deliberate. Joanna had noticed him ending conversations sooner, giving her greater physical distance in corridors and allowing Mr. Harcourt or Mrs. Bell to carry questions that he might once have asked directly. At first, she had thought he was protecting her from gossip after Elizabeth's attack. By that morning, she understood something else was happening. You are doing it again, Joanna said. Christopher's brow tightened. Doing what? Making a decision and disguising it as restraint. He leaned back slightly. That sounds serious. It is irritating. That may be worse. What decision have I made? Joanna folded the invoice. That when Daniel's name is cleared, you should disappear from my life. Christopher went very still. The accuracy of her guess answered before he did. I had not intended to disappear. How far away were you planning to stand? Joanna, that is not an answer. He looked toward the window. Frost still clung to the lower panes, though the morning had brightened. When he spoke, his voice was quieter. Daniel may have died saving me. We do not know that yet. We know he was trying to keep me alive. Yes. Christopher's hand tightened once around the arm of his chair. You are still in mourning. Samuel has begun looking at me as though my being alive tells him something about his father. And I find myself—" He stopped. Joanna waited. He gave a short breath, almost annoyed with himself. "I find myself thinking of you in ways that have nothing to do with the inquiry." The room seemed to contract around the sentence. Joanna did not look away. Christopher continued before she could answer. "That is precisely why distance seemed wise." "For whom?" "For you." Joanna stood, not because she wished to dramatize the moment, but because sitting across from him made the conversation feel too orderly. "There, that is the problem." Christopher's expression hardened with confusion rather than anger. "I am trying not to take advantage of grief. By deciding what grief permits me to feel?" "No." "Yes." Joanna crossed to the end of the table, but did not move nearer to him. "You have spent days insisting that no one should tell you what you remember, because your mind belongs to you. Yet you are perfectly willing to tell me what my mourning means, because you believe guilt makes you noble." The words landed. Christopher looked as though she had struck somewhere more vulnerable than his injured leg. "That is not what I meant." "Then tell me what you meant." He was silent for several seconds. "I meant that Daniel died and I lived. If he died saving me, then wanting his widow feels indecent." Joanna felt grief rise, but this time it did not silence her. "Daniel was my husband. I loved him. I still love what was ours. None of that makes me a shrine." Christopher closed his eyes briefly. Joanna continued, softer now, because softness required more control than anger. "I will not be made into my husband's monument so that you may kneel before it." His eyes opened. The defensiveness had gone. "You are right." Joanna had prepared herself for argument. The immediate surrender unsettled her more. That was quick. Painfully quick. His mouth tightened. "I thought I was choosing distance because it was honorable. In truth, I was using my guilt to decide what your future should look like." Joanna remained still. Christopher looked directly at her. "I am sorry." He did not add an excuse. No reference to his injury. No appeal to Daniel. "For deciding for you," he continued. "For assuming that restraint excuses the decision if the decision is still mine." Joanna felt some of the pressure leave the room. "That is better. Not forgiven. Do not become greedy." A faint, reluctant smile appeared. "I shall attempt moderation." Joanna returned to her chair. "Then we need rules." "That sounds ominous. Daniel's case comes first." Christopher nodded. "Agreed. No courtship while the inquiry is unresolved." His expression changed slightly at the word courtship, but he accepted it. "Agreed. Samuel is never to be used as an argument. Not because he likes you. Not because Daniel tried to save you. Not because you can offer him advantages." Christopher's face became serious. "Agreed without condition. If you choose to provide something for Samuel later, it must not depend upon me marrying you." "It will not." Joanna studied him. "And if your memory returns, it goes to Mr. Harcourt before it goes to a room full of county gentlemen." Christopher almost smiled. "You are determined to make me legally inconvenient. I am determined to keep you honest. That is more ambitious. You have a title. Someone should." The silence that followed felt different from the one before. The danger between them had not disappeared. It had been named without being indulged. Christopher looked down at the copied Mercer invoice. "May I add one rule?" Joanna raised an eyebrow. "You may propose one. When the time is right, I ask. I do not assume what your answer will be." Joanna held his gaze. "That is the lesson. And if the answer is no, then you survive it." His expression softened. "I have survived worse. Do not make that dramatic. I was attempting humor. Poorly." This time Joanna smiled, and Christopher did as well. No hand crossed the table. Neither needed touch to prove that something had changed. The door opened before the quiet could become dangerous. Mr. Harcourt entered, carrying a leather memorandum book and a folded note. "Mercer still trades," he said. Joanna straightened. "You found him? His son handles much of the business now, but Elias Mercer remains at the workshop. I sent a discreet inquiry without mentioning the rope." Christopher looked at the note. "And he will receive us tomorrow morning." Harcourt opened his memorandum book. There is one more useful detail. The 1854 order specifies 3 estate rescue lines, all finished to the same pattern. If Mercer remembers how he bound the ends, he may be able to identify where our line came from his shop. Joanna looked toward the adjoining room where Harcourt's locked case held the canvas-wrapped rope. The answer was now 1 day away. Christopher's gaze met hers across the table. No gratitude, no pity, no promise made too soon, only partnership. Joanna picked up Daniel's old invoice. "Then tomorrow," she said, "we stop asking anyone what they remember and ask a craftsman what he made." Elias Mercer's workshop stood off the Winchester Road behind a narrow yard strung with coils of hemp, tarred cord, and lengths of rope hung beneath an open shed to keep them from the worst of the weather. By 10 on the morning of February 17th, Joanna had already decided that rope makers possessed a more honest sort of room than drawing rooms. Nothing there pretended to be anything but useful. The air smelled of fibre, wax, oil, and cold wood. Mr. Harcourt carried the canvas-wrapped rescue line inside himself. He had removed it from his locked travelling case at Foxley, only long enough to place it beneath his own feet in the carriage. And he kept one hand upon the bundle when they entered the workshop. Christopher followed with his walking stick, moving carefully after the journey. Joanna came behind him. Mrs. Bell remained near the doorway, with an expression suggesting that any man who attempted to interfere with solicitor custody would have to answer to her first. Elias Mercer was a thin, white-haired man with broad hands and a measuring rule tucked through his apron. His adult son worked farther back among the reels, but did not join them. Mercer looked first at Christopher, then at Harcourt's bundle. "Your note said you wanted an opinion on estate rope. Only what you can honestly give," Harcourt replied. "No more." Mercer nodded. "That is usually enough to annoy someone." Christopher's mouth moved faintly. "Then we are in experienced company." Harcourt set the canvas on a long workbench and untied it in full view of Joanna, Christopher, and Mrs. Bell. He drew the hemp line out without surrendering possession. Mercer leaned closer, but did not touch it immediately. His gaze settled on the white whipping at one end. The waxed linen had yellowed with age, yet the pattern remained clear. "May I?" Mercer asked. Harcourt nodded. "Examine it here. It remains in my custody." Mercer lifted only the finished end and turned it beneath the window light. His fingers moved over 6 closely laid wraps, then stopped. "I know this finishing." Joanna felt her pulse quicken. "Because you made it." Mercer looked at her. "I would not say that from one glance." He examined the fibres farther down, pinching the rope between finger and thumb. "English hemp. Good grade, weathered, but not worked hard enough to have spent years hauling cargo." He returned to the whipping. "This white waxed linen is something I used for rescue lines supplied to estates. Easier to see dirt, fraying, and mildew against pale thread." Harcourt opened his memorandum book. "You supplied Brockhurst Ferry?" Mercer crossed to a shelf and pulled down a thick ledger. He turned pages with practiced speed until his finger stopped. "March 1854. 3 rescue lines, same length, same weight, delivered under a standing estate order. Joanna leaned nearer without touching the book. Daniel's name appeared in the margin as the estate agent who acknowledged delivery. The sight of it hurt, but she did not look away. Mercer returned to the rope. The ending matters more. He lifted the white whipping again. Most men finish forward and bury the loose end beneath the final turn. I reverse the last 6 wraps. He indicated the pattern. My father taught me another way. I changed it after too many wet lines loosened. Christopher asked, "Can you say this is one of the lines you supplied?" Mercer considered before answering. Joanna respected the pause. "I can say I am confident it is my work and consistent with that Brockhurst order. The age suits it, the material suits it, the finish suits it." "Could it have been made after July last year?" Harcourt asked. Mercer shook his head. "Not by me." He opened a newer ledger, then another. No replacement rescue line was ordered from this shop after July 1856. Not in August, not in autumn, not since. Joanna looked at Christopher. The change in his face was small but unmistakable. Conrad's argument had not vanished completely. A determined liar could always invent another supplier or another rope. But the path was narrowing. Mercer set the line down exactly where Harcourt had placed it. "If anyone says I supplied a fresh Brockhurst rescue line after the accident, they are wrong." Harcourt closed his memorandum book. "Will you repeat that before witnesses?" "Yes." Christopher inclined his head. "Thank you." Mercer gave him a level look. "Don't thank a craftsman for recognizing his own work, Your Grace. Pay the next invoice on time." Joanna heard Mrs. Bell cough into one hand to conceal amusement. Christopher nodded solemnly. "A reform I can begin immediately." By early afternoon, they had reached Brockhurst Ferry. Harcourt still carried the rope, now rewrapped in the same canvas. Isaac Pruett waited near the shuttered shelter with his cap in both hands. The tide had turned, exposing a strip of black mud beneath the old landing. Joanna felt the same pressure in her chest she had felt 6 days earlier, but something had changed. She was no longer standing before a place that belonged entirely to rumor. Mercer's ledger, the intact line, and Conrad's own deposition had begun giving the night edges. Harcourt told Isaac what Mercer had established. Isaac listened without interrupting. When he heard that no replacement rescue line had been ordered, his shoulders lowered slightly. "Then he can still call me a liar," he said, "but he'll have to work harder at it." "He will," Joanna replied. Isaac looked toward her. "You still want the rest." Joanna's breath caught. "Only if you are ready to give it." Christopher remained several paces away. He did not step closer. Isaac noticed. "You're not going to ask me first, Your Grace." Christopher's hand tightened once around the head of his walking stick. "I know what I want to hear. That is exactly why I should not lead you." Isaac studied him, then looked at the creek. The crossing started ordinary enough. Current stronger than I liked, but not enough to stop us. "Mr. Norris did not order me about, didn't interfere. He asked whether the lower chain was sound, and I told him it was." Joanna held herself still. Isaac continued. "Near the center, the ferry took the current badly. Swung harder than she should have. Everyone moved. Then we were in the water. His voice became rougher. Lord Conrad reached the shallows first. He was nearest the downstream side when she went over. I caught the landing post. His Grace and Mr. Norris were farther out. Christopher's face had gone pale. "What happened next?" Harcourt asked. I shouted for the line. Isaac pointed toward the shelter wall. It hung from the hook there. Lord Conrad was closer to it than I was. Could he reach it? Yes. Did he? Isaac shook his head. No. Joanna heard the reeds scraping together in the wind. And Daniel? Isaac looked at her. For several seconds he seemed unable to speak. Mr. Norris had nearly reached the shallows. Joanna's body went cold. Nearly. He could have kept coming. Isaac swallowed. Then he heard his grace behind him. Christopher closed his eyes. Isaac's voice dropped. Mr. Norris turned back. Joanna stared at the water. He went back into the current. Yes, ma'am. For Christopher? Yes. Isaac rubbed one thumb against the edge of his cap. I shouted at him not to. I shouted at Lord Conrad for the line again, Mr. Norris reached his grace, got one arm under his chin, kept his face above the water. Christopher opened his eyes, but his gaze remained fixed on the creek. I remember that. Isaac continued carefully. There was broken timber moving with the current. I couldn't see every second. Mr. Norris lost his hold once, found him again. Then both men went beyond the bend. Joanna's throat tightened. Daniel's body was found later. Yes, and Christopher was not. No, we thought he was gone too. Harcourt asked the necessary question. Mr. Pruett, did Lord Conrad have time to throw the rescue line before they disappeared beyond the bend? Isaac looked directly at him. Yes. Do you know why he did not? No. Isaac's answer came firmly. I don't know if he froze. I don't know if he thought they were already lost. I know, I shouted. I know the line was there. I know he didn't throw it. Joanna let the silence remain. That honesty mattered. Isaac was not giving her a villain's motive. He was giving her what he had seen. Daniel had nearly reached safety. Daniel had turned back. The accusation that he panicked and hindered Christopher was not merely cruel. It reversed the meaning of his last known act. Harcourt moved with Isaac toward the shelter to discuss a formal statement. Mrs. Bell followed far enough to remain within sight. Christopher stayed where he was. He did not approach Joanna until she looked at him. Joanna. His voice was low. Do you want me near you? The question broke through the control she had maintained while listening, not because she needed rescuing, because he still refused to decide what comfort she ought to accept. Joanna crossed the distance herself. Christopher did not lift his arms until she stepped close enough that there could be no misunderstanding. Then he held her. Gently, one hand settled between her shoulder blades, the other lightly at her upper arm. Joanna pressed her face against his coat and closed both arms around him. The embrace contained no urgency and no claim. It did not erase Daniel. It did not turn gratitude into romance. It simply gave her somewhere to stand while the truth rearranged 7 months of grief. He almost made it, she whispered. Christopher's breath caught. Yes, and he went back. Yes. Joanna tightened her arms once. For you. Christopher's voice roughened. For me. She closed her eyes. For the first time since July, Daniel's final choice belonged to Daniel rather than to Conrad's account. When Joanna stepped back, Christopher released her immediately. Harcourt was returning from the shelter when a rider appeared on the road from Foxley and handed him a sealed packet. The solicitor broke it, read the enclosed paper, and his expression hardened. What is it? Christopher asked. Harcourt looked at Isaac before answering. Lord Conrad has begun circulating copies of an old disciplinary memorandum through the trustees. Isaac's face drained. Joanna understood before Harcourt finished. What memorandum? A genuine reprimand, Harcourt said. Mr. Pruett was disciplined for drinking and reporting late to the ferry nearly 2 years before the accident. He looked at Joanna. The document is signed by Daniel Norris. By the morning of February 18th, Lord Conrad had stopped arguing that the rope might be false and begun arguing that the man who preserved it could not be trusted. The distinction mattered. Joanna understood it before Mr. Harcourt said a word. Conrad was retreating from the object because the object had become difficult to move, so he was attacking the witness instead. Samuel was in the corridor outside the study when Joanna arrived, kneeling on the carpet with Daniel's walnut spinning top between both hands. He twisted it carefully and released. The top spun once, leaned hard, and fell against the skirting board. Samuel frowned at it. "It's worse today." Joanna picked it up and handed it back. "Then try again later." He looked disappointed by the lack of philosophy in her answer, but obeyed. She was grateful. Some objects had already been made to carry too much meaning. Daniel's top could remain a toy for one more morning. Inside the study, Mr. Harcourt had laid the disciplinary memorandum on the desk. Christopher stood near the window with his walking stick resting beside him, his right leg visibly stiff from the previous day's journey. Isaac's old reprimand looked harmless enough. 1 page, formal wording, Daniel's signature. "It is genuine," Harcourt said. "I checked the estate ledger against it." Joanna read the document. Nearly 2 years before the ferry disaster, Isaac Pruitt had reported late for duty after drinking the previous evening. Daniel had reprimanded him, docked wages, and warned that repetition would result in dismissal. Nothing more. "Was there another incident?" Christopher asked. "None that I have found." Joanna looked at Daniel's signature. "Then Conrad is not proving Isaac lies. He is proving Isaac once made a mistake." Harcourt nodded. "That will not prevent people from confusing the two. Then we do not hide it." Christopher turned toward her. "You want it admitted?" "Of course." Joanna placed the memorandum flat on the desk. "If we begin pretending inconvenient facts do not exist, we become exactly what we are accusing them of being." Harcourt's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "There is something else." He drew another paper from his case. "This one is dated the 16th of July, 1856. Christopher's face changed. "Less than 2 weeks after the accident," Harcourt continued. "It is a letter from Lord Conrad concerning household reductions and future estate management, while the succession remained unresolved." Joanna read the first lines. Conrad asked how many senior servants might be released if Christopher was legally declared dead, which residences could be consolidated, and what authority he might eventually exercise if he became successor in practice as well as expectation. The language was cautious, almost administrative, that made it more unsettling. Christopher read the letter twice. "This proves nothing about the ferry." "No," Harcourt said, "and it must not be used as though it does." Joanna looked at Christopher. "It proves only that he began imagining a permanent future without you very quickly." Christopher's jaw tightened. "That is enough. Enough to understand pressure," Joanna said. "Not enough to invent motive." He met her gaze. "You are right." The answer came without argument. Joanna folded the copy and returned it to Harcourt. "If this reaches the inquiry, it should be presented exactly that way." A knock sounded at the door. The former Foxley housekeeper entered with a cane in one hand and an expression that suggested she had been rehearsing courage all morning. She was the same elderly woman who had helped verify Christopher's identity 8 days earlier. Now she looked less certain of herself. "Mr. Harcourt asked whether I remembered Mr. Pruitt coming to Foxley after the inquest." Harcourt gestured toward the chair nearest the fire. "Sit, please." She did. Christopher remained standing until she was settled, then took the opposite chair. Joanna stayed near the desk. "I remember," the housekeeper said. Too clearly. Harcourt opened his memorandum book. Tell us only what you heard. The woman clasped both hands over the head of her cane. Mr. Pruitt came the morning after the inquest, asked to see Her Grace the Dowager Duchess. He was upset, kept saying there had been a mistake about the line. Joanna felt the room tighten. The housekeeper continued. Her Grace received him in the breakfast room. The door did not close properly because the lower hinge had swollen. I was outside with a tray. Christopher's voice was quiet. What did Elizabeth say? The woman swallowed. She said the family had suffered enough confusion. She said Mr. Pruitt had already been reprimanded for drinking, and that people might ask why a man with his history had been trusted with the ferry. Harcourt wrote quickly. Anything else? She reminded him that his sister lived in an estate cottage. Joanna said nothing. The old woman looked at her. She did not say, "Speak and she loses it," not plainly. She did not need to, Joanna replied. The woman's eyes filled with shame. No. Christopher leaned forward. Why are you speaking now? The housekeeper looked at him, and when she answered, there was no attempt to flatter a duke. Because Mr. Norris once disciplined that man and still let him keep his place. He punished what Isaac actually did. He did not destroy him for what he might say next. Her fingers tightened around the cane. I watched this family do worse and called silence loyalty. Christopher absorbed the words without defending anyone. Will you repeat this before witnesses? Yes. Even if Elizabeth denies every word? Yes. Harcourt closed his book. Then I will prepare a statement for you to review, and you may correct anything I have recorded inaccurately. When she had gone, Joanna remained in the study while Christopher moved toward the mantel. The door stayed open. Mrs. Bell passed twice in the corridor, neither hurried nor curious. Christopher lifted one hand toward his temple, but stopped before touching the scar. There is more. Joanna waited. From the water. His eyes fixed on a point beyond the room. Yesterday, when Isaac described the bank, something settled into place. I did not trust it then. And now, I hear him shouting for the line. Christopher's voice lowered. I see a man near the shelter, the line behind him. I cannot see the face clearly. His breathing changed once. But I know the voice. Joanna did not prompt him. Conrad, he said. Silence followed. Are you certain? Certain enough to believe it, not certain enough to ask anyone else, to build a case upon it. He looked at her. The memory sharpened after Isaac gave me the scene. That matters. Joanna felt something deep in her chest loosen, not because he had named Conrad, because he still refused to make himself infallible. Then what will you say? Exactly. That. Christopher's gaze did not leave hers. My memory may stand beside the evidence. It won't stand in place of it. Joanna crossed the room slowly. The pale scar at his left temple caught the winter light. For days it had represented damage, uncertainty, and every reason others believed they could decide what his mind meant. Now it seemed to her like something else, proof that restraint had cost him effort. She stopped within arm's reach. May I? Christopher went still. His eyes moved briefly to her hand, then back to her face. Yes. Joanna lifted her gloved fingers and touched the edge of the scar. Lightly, no more than a moment. Christopher did not lean into the touch or away from it. He simply allowed it. Joanna lowered her hand. That is not weakness, she said. What isn't? Knowing where certainty ends. Something in his expression softened. Before he could answer, Harcourt returned carrying another folded document. The trustees have agreed to convene an estate inquiry at Brockhurst Ferry on the 20th. Christopher straightened. At the landing? Yes, It will concern whether House Brockhurst's own records and decisions rested upon false representations. It is not a criminal trial and not a new inquest. Harcourt looked at them both. A local justice of the peace will attend as an independent county witness, because what is said may require later legal referral. He will not sit as judge. Joanna felt the final shape of the confrontation settle into place. Rope, deposition, Mercer, Isaac, the housekeeper, Christopher's limited memory, facts, each carrying only its proper weight. And Conrad? She asked. Harcourt's expression hardened. He has been notified. Christopher looked toward the winter road beyond the window, in the direction of the ferry. Then, on the 20th, he answers the rope where he should have thrown it. By breakfast on February 19th, Conrad had found a new way to resist the inquiry without refusing to attend it. Mr. Harcourt entered Foxley Hall's study, carrying a folded letter sealed with the Brockhurst crest and an expression Joanna had learned to distrust. Christopher was already there, seated near the fire, with his walking stick beside him. The cold had settled deeply into the house overnight, and the stiffness in his right leg had been worse that morning. Joanna stood at the long table, reviewing Harcourt's copied witness list. The rescue line remained where it belonged, locked inside the solicitor's secured traveling case. No one had touched it since the previous day. Harcourt broke Conrad's seal, only after both Joanna and Christopher were watching. He objects to the terms of tomorrow's inquiry. Christopher's mouth hardened. On what grounds? Harcourt unfolded the page. Several. Joanna set down her pencil. How generous of him. Harcourt read the first objection. Conrad argued that Joanna should not be permitted to present questions directly, because she possessed an obvious personal interest in clearing Daniel's name. The second claimed that Christopher's recovered memories were medically uncertain and should carry no weight. The third asked that Isaac's testimony be restricted because of his old disciplinary record. Christopher listened without interruption until Harcourt finished. And the trustees, he asked, rejected all three. Joanna looked up. Harcourt continued. They agree Mrs. Norris has a personal interest. They also agree Lord Conrad has one. That does not disqualify either from speaking. They will distinguish argument from evidence. And Isaac? His old reprimand may be acknowledged. It does not prevent him describing what he saw. Christopher glanced toward Joanna. My memory. Harcourt's answer was immediate. Exactly what you requested. You speak last. You distinguish what you remembered before hearing Pruitt's account from what sharpened afterward. No one is instructed to treat your title as proof. Christopher nodded once. Joanna saw some of the tension leave his shoulders. Good. Harcourt folded Conrad's letter. There is one point I want absolutely clear before tomorrow. This is not a criminal trial. It is not a new inquest. The trustees are examining whether House Brockhurst's estate records, administrative decisions, and treatment of Mr. Norris and Mr. Pruitt were based upon materially false representations. Joanna said, and the justice of the peace. He attends as an independent county witness because testimony may raise questions that require proper referral afterward. He will not sit as judge. He will not pronounce sentence. If evidence suggests a further legal matter, I will prepare it for counsel and the appropriate authorities. Christopher looked toward the cold windows. Conrad knows this. Yes. Then his objections are not about fairness. Joanna answered before Harcourt could. They are about controlling who gets heard. Christopher looked at her. That was my conclusion. Harcourt placed the letter aside. There is another practical matter. Lord Conrad has agreed to attend only after I confirmed that you would not question him as Duke. Christopher's gaze sharpened. I had no intention of doing so. I know the trustees will ask relevant questions. I will present the documents. Mrs. Norris may speak to the estate record. Mr. Pruett and the former housekeeper will speak for themselves. Mercer will identify his work. Harcourt paused. Your Grace, you ask that Mrs. Norris and Mr. Pruett speak before you. The trustees have agreed. Joanna turned toward Christopher. He did not look pleased with himself. He looked relieved. Thank you, she said. Do not thank me for doing what should have happened months ago. Then, I will thank you for learning quickly. That earned the faintest movement at the corner of his mouth. Harcourt gathered his papers. I will spend the afternoon with the trustees. The rope remains locked until dawn. I will carry it myself. As before, Joanna said, as before. He left them with the study door open and Mrs. Bell visible in the corridor beyond, sorting folded linen with the solemn concentration of a woman who had somehow made chaperonage look like household warfare. Christopher remained seated for several moments after Harcourt departed. Joanna returned to the witness list, but she did not read it. You are worried, she said. That is observant. It was not difficult. He looked at her. Tomorrow, if I speak and they believe me because I am Duke, we fail. If you speak accurately, we do not fail merely because some people are impressed by your title. No, but I have lived long enough among men who hear rank before meaning. His hand rested against the head of his walking stick. I spent months unable to remember my own name. Now I have returned to a place where saying that name can make other people doubt themselves. Joanna closed the witness list. Then say less. Christopher gave her a dry look. You continue to offer very severe comfort. It saves time. What should I say? Only what you know. And if I remember something while standing there, say that you remembered it then, even if it damages Conrad, especially then. Joanna met his eyes. Truth does not become cleaner because we arrange it to arrive conveniently. Christopher looked toward the fire. Daniel would have liked you. Joanna felt the old ache, but it no longer opened beneath her like a pit. He did. Christopher's gaze returned to her. That was badly phrased. Very. I meant that I understand why he loved you. The room changed. Joanna felt it immediately. Christopher did too. He shifted slightly, then stopped as though retreat itself had become another habit he wished to examine before obeying. There is something I should say before tomorrow, he said, because you may decide afterward that I have made all of this intolerably complicated. You have already achieved that. A quiet breath of laughter escaped him. Then his expression became serious. I told you I think of you in ways that do not belong in an inquiry. Yes, that has not improved. Joanna's pulse changed. Christopher looked down at his hands. And when he spoke again, the certainty of a duke was gone from his voice. I want a future in which I am permitted to know you when no one is discussing Daniel, Conrad, the ferry, or whether I remember correctly. He swallowed once, but I am afraid of the reasons you might allow it. Joanna did not interrupt. Samuel trusts me, Christopher continued. Perhaps because I returned from the place his father did not. You have every reason to feel gratitude if I help clear Daniel's name, and Daniel may have died keeping me alive. His jaw tightened. I do not want to become an obligation he left behind. The honesty of it touched something deeper than flattery could have. Joanna stepped away from the table and sat in the chair opposite him. Christopher. He went still at his given name. When the time comes, I will decide what you mean to me. He held her gaze. Joanna continued. Samuel will not decide it. Daniel's courage will not decide it. Your title will not decide it. And your guilt certainly will not decide it. His expression softened with something almost painful. You make that sound very simple. No, I make it mine, Christopher nodded slowly. Then I will leave it yours. Good. May I hope? Joanna considered him. Quietly, his mouth curved. I have been told restraint is good for me. By very wise people, one very persistent woman. Joanna rested her hand on the small table between them. She did not offer it palm upward. She simply left it there, close enough that he could understand the choice, without mistaking it for a promise. Christopher looked at her hand, then placed his beside it. Their fingers touched lightly along the edges. No one clasped. No one pulled closer. After the embrace at the ferry, the restraint felt more intimate rather than less. They were not overwhelmed by grief. They were choosing nearness while fully aware of what it might someday mean. Christopher's little finger shifted until it rested against hers. Joanna allowed it. Tomorrow, he said, if I say more than I know, stop me. I will. In front of everyone, especially in front of everyone. That is reassuring in a terrifying sort of way. You are welcome. They remained that way for another quiet moment before Joanna withdrew first. Christopher let his hand fall back without following hers. Outside, winter dusk had already begun to gather over Foxley's grounds. Before dawn the next morning, Mr. Harcourt unlocked his travelling case in the presence of the steward, lifted the canvas-wrapped rescue line with his own hands, and carried it to the waiting carriage. For the first time since July, the rope Conrad swore had broken was going back to the landing where he should have thrown it. By a little after 9 on the morning of February 20th, the Brockhurst Ferry landing held more witnesses than Joanna had ever seen gathered there. Yet the place itself remained stubbornly ordinary. Frost silvered the railings. The tidal creek moved beneath the platform with a dull winter current. Reeds bent in the wind. Nothing in the landscape acknowledged that one man had died there, another had vanished for 7 months, and a third had built his future upon an account the surviving evidence could no longer support. Mr. Harcourt descended from the carriage with the canvas-wrapped rescue line in his own hands. He had kept it under continuous custody since Isaac Pruitt transferred it to him 9 days earlier. Joanna watched him carry it to a temporary table beside the shelter and place it beneath the open view of the 2 estate trustees. He did not unwrap it yet. Christopher arrived behind her using his walking stick. The cold had stiffened his right leg during the 2-hour journey, and a chair had been placed near the shelter at Harcourt's insistence. Christopher accepted it without argument. Joanna noticed that too. He no longer treated every limitation as something rank required him to defeat. Conrad and Elizabeth arrived together. Conrad wore dark wool and an expression composed enough to seem almost bored. Elizabeth's face was pale beneath her bonnet, though whether from cold or calculation Joanna could not tell. Elias Mercer stood near Isaac. The former Foxley housekeeper waited beside Mrs. Bell. Several estate workers and county gentlemen remained farther back. The local justice of the peace stood with the trustees, not above them, his role made deliberately plain before a single question began. Mr. Harcourt addressed the gathering. This is an estate inquiry convened by the trustees of House Brockhurst. It is not a criminal trial. It is not a new inquest. The purpose is to determine whether estate records, administrative decisions, and the treatment of Mr. Daniel Norris and Mr. Isaac Pruitt rested upon materially false representations. His worship is present as an independent county witness. Because matters raised here may require separate legal referral afterward. The justice of the peace inclined his head but said nothing. Conrad looked toward Christopher. Then, perhaps we may avoid performance. Christopher remained seated. That would be welcome. Harcourt placed the original deposition on the table. Lord Conrad Brockhurst gave this statement 6 days after the ferry disaster of July 3rd, 1856. He read only the relevant passages. Daniel Norris had allegedly interfered with Isaac's handling of the crossing. Daniel had allegedly contributed to the ferry becoming unstable. After the capsize, Conrad claimed that he reached the shallows, seized the rescue line, threw it toward Christopher and Daniel, and felt it snap under their weight. Daniel was then described as panicked and as making Christopher's rescue more difficult. Harcourt lowered the document. "My lord, is this your signature?" Conrad looked at it. "Yes." "And did you understand this to be your sworn account when you gave it?" "Yes." Harcourt did not argue. He turned to the canvas bundle. "Then we proceed to the line." In full view of the trustees, Harcourt untied the canvas and drew out the heavy hemp rope. Its white whipping, yellowed with age, remained intact. The coil made a dull sound against the table. Joanna heard someone behind her shift position. Conrad did not. Harcourt documented the chain of custody aloud. Isaac had preserved the line after the inquest. On February 11th, he had transferred it directly to Harcourt in the presence of Christopher, Joanna, and Mrs. Bell. Since then, it had remained under Harcourt's control except for examination conducted in his presence. Elias Mercer stepped forward when called. He described the white waxed linen whipping, the reversed final raps characteristic of his own finishing method, and the Brockhurst order from March 1854 for 3 estate rescue lines. "Can you say this line is one you supplied to the Brockhurst estate?" one trustee asked. Mercer considered before replying. "I can say I am confident it is my work and consistent with that order. The hemp, age, and finishing agree. Was a replacement rescue line ordered from you after July 1856? No." Conrad spoke before Harcourt could move on. "You cannot prove no other rope maker supplied one." Mercer looked at him. "No, my lord. I can only tell you what I made and what I did not." Joanna felt a brief, grim satisfaction. No one was pretending evidence could say more than it did. That made every piece stronger. Isaac Pruitt was called next. He looked frightened, and Joanna was glad of it. Courage meant little when fear had been removed. Isaac began by admitting the fact Conrad had circulated. "I was reprimanded for drinking and reporting late nearly 2 years before the accident. Mr. Norris signed the reprimand. I deserved it. It did not happen again." Conrad folded his arms. Isaac continued. "Daniel had not ordered the crossing or interfered with the ferry. The current had been stronger than usual, but not enough, in Isaac's judgment, to prevent departure. Near the center, the ferry swung badly. After the capsize, Conrad reached the shallow bank. Isaac caught the landing structure. Christopher and Daniel were swept farther out. "What did you do?" Harcourt asked. "I shouted for the rescue line. Who was nearest it?" Isaac looked at Conrad. "Lord Conrad. Could he reach it?" "Yes." "Did he throw it?" "No." The answer landed without drama. Harcourt let the silence remain, and Mr. Norris? He had nearly reached the shallows. Joanna's chest tightened, even though she knew what came next. Then he turned back for his grace, reached him, got an arm under him, and kept his face above water. Conrad's mouth hardened. "You were struggling in the water yourself." "Yes, my lord." Your recollection cannot be perfect. No, my lord. Isaac looked at him steadily, but the rope was never thrown. Harcourt called the former housekeeper. Her cane trembled slightly against the boards as she took her place. She described Isaac coming to Foxley after the inquest and asking to see Elizabeth. She described the breakfast room door that had failed to close properly. Then she repeated what she had heard. Elizabeth had told Isaac the family had suffered enough confusion. She had reminded him of his previous drinking offence and his sister's cottage on Brockhurst land. Elizabeth interrupted. I never threatened his sister. The housekeeper looked toward her. Not plainly, Your Grace. Then this is interpretation. Yes. The old woman's voice steadied. The interpretation of a servant who spent 40 years learning, when great people meant more than they said. A murmur moved through the witnesses. Elizabeth's face whitened. Harcourt raised one hand, and the sound stopped. He then produced Conrad's administrative letter dated July 16th. This document is not evidence of what happened in the water, he said before anyone could object. It is relevant only because Lord Conrad's counsel in correspondence concerned the authority he expected to exercise if his Grace's absence became permanent. Conrad's eyes flashed. That proves nothing about the accident. Joanna spoke for the first time. It does not. Conrad looked toward her, surprised. Joanna continued, and we do not need it to. The words seemed to unsettle him more than accusation would have. Your future plans do not prove why you failed to throw the rope. They show only that Christopher's continued absence became useful to you very quickly. The question before us remains simpler. What did you swear you did, and what does the evidence show? Harcourt folded the letter and set it aside. Christopher was called last. He rose, then chose to remain seated when his right leg resisted him. No one diminished him for it. I remember Daniel Norris supporting my head above the water, he said. I remember shouting, or hearing someone shout, for a line. I remember a figure on the bank. More recently, I have come to associate the voice of that figure with Conrad. Conrad gave a short laugh, after Pruett told you I was there. Christopher looked at him. Yes. The answer silenced the landing. That is why my memory cannot be the foundation of this inquiry. Some of it sharpened after I heard Mr. Pruett's account. I believe the figure was you. But belief is not what proves your deposition false. Harcourt turned toward Conrad. My lord, do you still maintain that you threw the rescue line and felt it snap in your hands? Conrad stared at the intact coil. No one spoke. Elizabeth looked at him once, sharply. Conrad's face changed. There was confusion. That is not an answer. One trustee's voice was quiet. Conrad's composure finally cracked. I believed they were already lost. Joanna heard Isaac inhale. Harcourt did not move. Then you did not throw the line. Conrad's jaw clenched. I could not have reached them in time. Isaac spoke from several feet away. You could have reached the rope. Conrad turned on him. You do not know what I thought. No, my lord. I know what you did. The statement ended the argument more effectively than anger could have. Joanna stepped forward when Harcourt invited her to speak. She looked first at the trustees, not at Conrad. I do not ask this house to call Daniel Norris a saint because he is dead. I knew his faults better than anyone here. I ask only that the record contain what the evidence supports. Her voice tightened but remained clear. Daniel did not cause the ferry disaster. There is no credible evidence that he hindered Christopher's rescue. The surviving witness says Daniel nearly reached safety and turned back. Christopher remembers Daniel keeping him alive. The rescue line Conrad swore he threw remained unused and intact. Joanna looked toward the estate minute book, resting near one trustee. My son has lived 7 months with his father's name attached to another man's false account. Correct it. The senior trustee opened the minute book. In full view of everyone, he drew one firm line through the entry that described Daniel Norris as responsible for the disaster, and wrote beside it that the finding was withdrawn pending formal amendment. Based upon the evidence heard that day, Joanna felt something inside her go still, not healed, not erased, released. Christopher rose despite the pain in his leg. House Brockhurst allowed convenience, rank, and family self-protection to stand where truth should have stood, he said. Daniel Norris and his family carried the cost. So did Isaac Pruett. I cannot undo that. I can make certain it does not continue. He turned toward Conrad. You will exercise no further authority over Foxley, its tenants, employees, household, or accounts. You will not represent House Brockhurst in estate administration. Then he faced Elizabeth. Your lawful dower rights remain yours. Your practical authority at Foxley does not. Elizabeth's mouth tightened. You would humiliate your own family in public? Christopher's answer was quiet. The humiliation began when this family preferred a useful lie. Harcourt stepped forward before the exchange could become personal. Certified copies of the deposition, statements, and supporting records will be prepared for counsel and the appropriate county authorities. Any further legal consequence will be determined elsewhere. The justice of the peace nodded once. No sentence was pronounced. No one pretended justice could be completed in a morning, but Conrad left the landing without the authority he had arrived with. Elizabeth followed moments later, rigid with fury and silence. Harcourt recoiled the rescue line and returned it to his canvas wrapping, and secured custody for whatever proceedings came next. The witnesses gradually dispersed. Joanna remained near the water until only Mrs. Bell and Harcourt stood within easy sight. Christopher approached, but stopped before reaching for her. Daniel's name is his again, he said. Joanna looked at the creek. Yes, and yours. She turned toward him. Mine was always mine. Something warm entered his face. He did not argue. Joanna reached for his hand first. Christopher's fingers closed around hers. I meant what I said yesterday, he told her. I will not ask gratitude, scandal, or mourning to answer for you. Joanna held his gaze. Good. His thumb moved once against her glove. She did not withdraw. When I am ready, she said. You may ask me who I am when I am not defending the dead. Christopher's hand tightened once, then loosened enough to leave the choice entirely hers. Joanna kept holding it. By May of 1858, the apple trees at Foxley Hall had flowered twice since Christopher Brockhurst returned to his own front door, and Joanna had learned that patience could reveal a man more clearly than crisis ever had. After the inquiry at Brockhurst Ferry, Christopher had kept every promise he made. He did not turn Daniel's restored name into permission to court her. He did not make Samuel's affection into an argument. He did not use the gratitude of House Brockhurst as a bridge toward marriage. Mr. Harcourt settled a provision for Samuel's education that sprang entirely in Daniel Norris's name, with no condition attached to Joanna's future. Christopher told her only after the papers were complete. I didn't want you wondering whether refusing me might cost him anything. Joanna had looked at him for several seconds. You are learning, painfully. Conrad never again exercised authority over Foxley. The trustees recorded formally that he could not represent House Brockhurst in estate administration and the questions arising from his false statement. continued through council and the proper county channels without Joanna being required to build her life around the outcome. Elizabeth retained her lawful dower rights and withdrew to her dower residence, where distance proved more effective than argument. Joanna's formal mourning passed, without anyone deciding for her what should follow it. When Christopher began paying proper calls early in 1858, he did so with almost comic attention to every boundary she had once accused him of inventing for her. On one bitter January afternoon, he arrived through sleet after a journey that worsened his limp. Joanna told him she could receive him only until 4:30, because Samuel's lessons and her estate work came first. At precisely 4:30, Christopher stood. "I believe I have been dismissed." Joanna glanced at the clock, temporarily. "That is encouraging." He bowed, thanked her for the tea, and left without lingering in the hall or turning his difficult journey into a claim upon another hour. 2 weeks later, Joanna invited him to remain for tea herself. He was wise enough not to look triumphant. By late May, their walks through Foxley's orchard had become ordinary enough that Mrs. Bell could sit within sight on the terrace and pretend to mend linen without monitoring every breath they took. Samuel was farther down the slope, demonstrating a game to a gardener's boy, changing the rules whenever victory appeared threatened. Christopher walked beside Joanna beneath the apple trees. His right leg was stronger than it had been the previous winter, though a long walk could still bring the old stiffness into his stride. The scar at his left temple remained pale and visible. Joanna no longer noticed either first. Christopher stopped near an old tree whose blossom had begun falling across the grass. "May I ask you something?" Joanna looked at him. "You have become surprisingly cautious about questions." "I was once told that asking is preferable to deciding. An excellent principle. I have suffered under excellent principles for more than a year." Joanna smiled. "Ask." Christopher glanced once toward Samuel, then back at her. "Are you ready for the question you gave me at the ferry?" Her heart changed its rhythm. She knew exactly which question he meant. "Yes." Christopher drew a slow breath. "Who are you when you are not defending the dead?" Joanna had imagined answering many times. The truth, when spoken, was simpler. A mother. Yes, a woman who likes useful work and dislikes being managed. Both have been demonstrated beyond dispute. A woman who still misses her husband. Christopher did not look away, Joanna continued. And a woman who once believed that loving again would mean I had somehow loved Daniel badly the first time. Christopher's expression softened, but he remained silent. Joanna looked across the orchard toward Samuel. "I do not believe that anymore. Why? Because Daniel is not diminished by my being alive." She turned back to him, "And neither am I." For a moment, Christopher said nothing. Then the reserve he had carried so carefully for months gave way to something quieter and far more vulnerable. "I love you, Joanna." No explanation followed. No mention of Daniel saving him. No gratitude, no title, no promise of protection. Joanna felt tears gather, not from grief this time, but from the relief of hearing love offered without debt attached to it. "I love you too." Christopher closed his eyes for one brief second. When he opened them again, the uncertainty in his face made him seem younger than the Duke in the portrait that had first watched her open the door. He stepped closer, but not enough to touch her. "May I kiss you?" Joanna smiled. Yes, he waited. Joanna closed the final distance herself. Christopher lifted one hand to her cheek, his touch gentle enough to remain a question even after she had answered. Their first kiss was quiet and unhurried. Joanna placed one hand against the front of his coat and kissed him back. There was no sense of replacing Daniel, no sense of completing a debt begun in dark water. There was only Christopher, warm and alive beneath her hand, and the future she was choosing with her eyes open. When they parted, Christopher did not immediately speak. Joanna raised an eyebrow. "Have you forgotten the rest? I am trying very hard not to ruin this. A worthy effort." His mouth curved. "Then I will risk one more question." He took her hand. "Will you marry me?" Joanna studied him with deliberate seriousness. "That depends." Alarm flashed across his face. "On what?" "Whether you intend to spend the marriage asking permission before every cup of tea." Christopher exhaled. "You are cruel. I have been accused of worse." She tightened her fingers around his. "Yes, I will marry you." His answering smile was so unguarded that Joanna laughed. Christopher bent his head as though to kiss her again, then stopped. Joanna spared him the question and kissed him first. In August, more than 2 years after Daniel Norris died, Joanna married Christopher in the parish church near Foxley. The ceremony was quiet by ducal standards and exactly large enough by hers. Mr. Harcourt attended. Isaac Pruitt stood among the estate families, no longer treated as a man whose old mistake erased every later truth. Elias Mercer came with his son. Elizabeth sent a correct note from her dower residence. Conrad remained absent from Foxley affairs and from the wedding. No one mentioned him during breakfast. Joanna became Duchess of Woldingham, but Christopher never used her new title to erase the woman who had been Mrs. Norris. Samuel remained Samuel Norris, 7 years and 8 months old, Daniel's son and Christopher's stepson. Daniel's portrait remained in Joanna's private sitting room. Christopher had suggested the place himself. "He doesn't become less Samuel's father because I am here." That afternoon, the wedding breakfast spilled into the orchard beneath a warm August sky. Samuel came running toward Joanna with the old walnut spinning top clutched in one hand. Its brass tip was scratched. The wood was darker from years of handling. Nothing about it had been repaired into perfection. "Mama, watch." Joanna turned. "I am watching." Samuel set the top on the sun-warmed stone coping near the terrace. Christopher came to stand beside her. Samuel twisted the stem and released it. The top spun fast, leaned sharply, and began to wobble. For one suspended second, Joanna thought it would fall. Then the little walnut body corrected itself. Its circles steadied. It kept turning. Samuel threw up both hands. "I told you it could." Christopher smiled. "You did." Joanna watched the top continue across the stone and understood that nothing had been restored to what it was before. Daniel was still dead. Christopher still carried a scar and a limp. Samuel had lost his father. Joanna had lost a husband she had loved, yet none of those truths required the future to collapse beneath them. Christopher's hand rested at his side. Joanna reached for it first and laced her fingers through his. He looked down at her. "Happy?" "Very. That is reassuring. You sound surprised." "I have learned not to assume." Joanna smiled. "Good." When Samuel ran off after the gardener's boy and the guests drifted toward the terrace, Joanna lifted one hand to Christopher's face and kissed him softly. He returned the kiss, then rested his forehead lightly against hers. "I love you," he murmured. Joanna squeezed his hand. "And I love you." Behind them, Daniel's walnut top wobbled once more, found its balance, and kept turning.